Welcome back, science fans. Ever wonder what makes gelatin, jiggly, and what that jiggle has to do with bacteria? Get ready, because today's deep dive is all about a super clever test. It's the gelatin hydrolysis test.
It's true. We can actually use something as basic as gelatin to uncover cool secrets about these tiny organisms.
Okay, now I'm really interested. This test helps scientists identify different types of bacteria, is that right?
Exactly. See, not all bacteria are the same. Some have this special talent for breaking down gelatin, and with this test, we can find out which ones have that skill.
So where does gelatin even come into this? I mean, I usually think of it as just a dessert.
Well, gelatin actually comes from collagen, which is like the framework that holds our tissues together. Imagine like really strong, flexible ropes running all through your body, giving it structure and support.
Wow, so it's not just about the jiggle. How does this collagen, this framework stuff, become gelatin?
It's all in how it's extracted. When collagen is processed, it turns into gelatin, which, has that wobbly texture. And that texture is actually a key part of figuring out these bacteria.
Okay, so we've got our gelatin, we've got our microscopic suspects. Now what? How does this test actually work?
Scientists make a special gelatin medium. Think of it like a buffet for bacteria. They put a sample of bacteria into this medium and let it sit for a day or two.
Giving those bacteria plenty of time to chow down at the gelatin buffet.
Exactly. Now here comes the really clever part. After that incubation time, they cool the samples down. And this cooling down is really important.
Why cool things down? What's up with giving the bacteria a chill-out session?
Well, gelatin, it melts when it gets warm, right? So by cooling it down, we can be absolutely sure that if it stays liquid, it's because the bacteria have this special enzyme that's breaking down the gelatin. It's not just the heat doing it.
So it's like a science experiment and a magic trick all in one with the disappearing gelatin.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And the enzyme that makes this disappearing act happen, it's called gelatinase.
Gelatinase. So that's their secret weapon, the thing that lets those bacteria break down the gelatin.
That's it. And whether or not this enzyme is there, it tells us so much about the type of bacteria we're looking at.
So it's like their bacterial fingerprint. If they've got gelatinase, we know they're a certain type of bacteria. This is really cool. But what does it look like in the lab? How can you actually see the results?
It's actually really straightforward. Imagine we have two samples after we cool them down. A positive result, meaning the gelatinase is there, would mean that the gelatin is still liquid.
So no more jiggle. It's just like a puddle of, well, formerly jiggly stuff.
You got it. The gelatinase is basically chopped up all those long collagen chains, so even though it's cooled down, the gelatin can't become solid again. And some bacteria, they're really good at this.
Like who? Give us some names.
One of them is called hydrolysis. It's usually found in water, and it's kind of a superstar when it comes to this gelatinase thing.
Okay, hydrolysis, they're the gelatin-busting champs. But what about a negative result? What happens if the bacteria don't exactly ace this gelatin buffet?
Well, in that case, after we cool it down, the medium, it would become solid again, just like you'd expect regular gelatin to do. It basically tells us that those bacteria didn't make any gelatinase, so those collagen chains, they're still all linked together.
So it's all about whether it jiggles or doesn't. Like good old E. coli, it's famous for being gelatin's negative, right?
That's right. E. coli doesn't have the right tools to break apart those collagen chains, so the gelatin, it stays solid. But here's the fascinating thing. Even though it seems like a really simple difference, like, oh, is it liquid or solid? It actually tells us a lot.
You mean it tells us more than just which bacteria like to snack on gelatin? Tell me more. Tell me more.
It does. This test isn't just about identifying bacteria. It's about understanding what they can do and how that could affect us. For example, let's say in medicine, figuring out if a bacteria, like Staphylococcus aureus, is positive for gelatinase, that can be super important for deciding on the right treatment.
So it's like an extra clue to solve a medical mystery.
Exactly. And it's not just about treating infections that are already happening either. Think about food safety. This test can help make sure that the food we eat doesn't have any unwanted bacteria in it.
Yeah, that makes sense. We don't want any gelatinase-positive party crashers in our food. But how does this test fit in with things like environmental science?
That's a really good question. In environmental science, knowing which bacteria can break down complex things like gelatin, that can be super useful, especially for something called bioremediation.
Bioremediation. That sounds like a really big word for something tiny.
It is, in a way. Basically, bioremediation is when we use living things, usually microbes, to clean up pollution or like places that are contaminated. And some bacteria that are positive for gelatinase, Because they're so good at breaking down those complex molecules, they can actually be really helpful for this.
You mean these tiny little living things can help us deal with pollution? That's wild.
It really shows how powerful it can be to use the natural world to help our planet.
Yeah.
And to think, it all starts with this simple test, using something as ordinary as gelatin. But there's even more to it than that. Remember how we were talking about how gelatin comes from collagen?
Yeah, that strong, flexible stuff that holds our bodies together.
Right. And because some bacteria can break down a protein that's as tough as collagen, that actually tells us some pretty interesting things about how infections spread inside the body, too.
Wait, so those bacteria that eat gelatin, they could be using their superpowers to cause trouble in our bodies, too.
Kinda, yeah. It's not that every bacteria that produces gelatinase is harmful, but some of them can use this enzyme to help them out when they're causing an infection. Think of it like this. If they can break down collagen, that might mean they can move through our tissues more easily, and that could make the infection worse.
Okay, that's a little creepy, but also super cool. It's like these bacteria have these tiny little tools that take apart the gelatin piece by piece, and sometimes those same tools can cause chaos in our bodies.
Exactly. It really highlights how complex the microbial world is and how these tiny organisms are constantly interacting with our own health.
This is blowing my mind. We started with this seemingly basic test with gelatin, and now we're talking about infections, cleaning up pollution, and even the very building blocks of our bodies.
And we're just scratching the surface. What's so amazing is how beautifully simple this test is. Just by watching to see if something changes from a solid to a liquid, we can learn so much about what these bacteria can do.
It makes you really appreciate how important it is to just observe things in science. But I'm curious, how does this gelatinase actually work? Like, what's going on at the molecular level?
Well, remember that gelatinase, it's an enzyme. And basically, enzymes are like tiny little molecular scissors. They speed up chemical reactions in living things.
So in this case, the gelatinase is snipping up those gelatin chains, link by link.
You got it. These enzymes are really picky about which molecules they go after and how they interact with them. And gelatinase, it specifically targets the bonds that hold those collagen chains together.
And when those chains get broken down into smaller pieces, the gelatin, it can't hold its shape anymore, and then we're left with
a puddle of formerly jiggly evidence. It's like a tiny little puzzle. And this test gives us a big clue to help us understand these amazing microorganisms.
It's amazing how much we can learn just from looking and seeing what happens.
It really is. It's like the beauty of science, you know.
We've talked about so much today, the science behind this gelatin hydrolysis test and all the different ways it's used.
And we're just getting started. There's a whole lot more to discover about bacteria, and this test is like one of the tools we can use to unlock those secrets.
It really makes you think about how much is out there just waiting to be discovered in the most ordinary places.
I know, right? Who knew that something as simple as, gelatin could tell us so much about bacteria?
This has been an awesome deep dive. This test is so simple, but it's given us this incredible look into the world of bacteria, how they can break down stuff, and what that means for us.
Totally. It just goes to show how everything in nature is connected and how important it is to keep asking questions.
So next time you see some gelatin, really take a minute to appreciate that jiggle.
Because in that jiggle, there's a whole world of tiny wonders just waiting for us to discover them.
And hey, you might even impress your friends with your newfound gelatase knowledge.
Exactly.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.